Yeah.
Okay, so welcome. I'm Sarah Jane Huber. I'm with the City of Cambridge. I'm in the Economic Opportunity and Development Division. We sit in the Community Development Department. It's a lot of words, a mouthful. But we work a lot with small businesses, including a few folks who are here tonight. And we have heard a lot in the last few years from folks about planning to transition out of a business, about owners getting ready to think about what's next for them and think about what's next for their business. Be here um, um, from ICA Group to share about their work and about employee ownership as a for small businesses. I can turn it over to you all.
Great. Thanks, Sarah Jane. And your audio was a little jumbled for me in the last few seconds there. So I'm gonna, just in case it was for other people, I'm gonna reintroduce the title of the presentation and myself and Khalif just to make sure there's clarity. So thank you all for joining. We're really looking forward to this presentation. And Khalif and I are going to be talking about one of many succession strategies and options that folks have as they're thinking about retirement or as they're thinking about kind of the next phase of their business, and that is employee ownership. We'll talk about a whole variety of different succession strategies, but we'll kind of be honing in and focusing on employee ownership as part of this presentation. So I'm going to kick us off. So for our agenda today, we're going to start off just by doing some really quick introductions, and I'd love if folks could in the Q&A just write a little bit about themselves. I'll give you a prompt momentarily, but just maybe find that Q&A button in your Zoom window to prepare yourself. So we're going to start off today by talking about a few different types of succession options, kind of walking through the pros and cons of each of them, describing what those kind of primary options are to business owners as they're thinking about retirement or thinking about exiting. Next, we'll be talking about ICA's conversion process for employee ownership transition specifically, kind of how you can, if you decide that it's the right fit for your business, kind of walk through the steps to become employee owned. And then finally, we'll talk a bit more about one of the employee ownership models, the cooperative model. And we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. And so feel free to either write questions in the chat as they come up for you, or you are welcome to hold on to those until the end if that feels more right up your alley. So a quick introduction to the ICA Group. We are a nonprofit that seeks to change the nature of work by advancing businesses and institutions that center worker voice, grow worker wealth, and build worker power. We've been around since the 1970s, and we're based in Western Massachusetts, but we're a national nonprofit, and we work with many companies throughout New England and the Northeast, as well as a handful kind of scattered across the country. We're a mission-driven nonprofit. We're a 501c3, and our kind of specialty is a business advisory practice with a deep understanding of worker ownership as a succession tool. So we facilitate the transition of businesses to employee ownership. And so we'll be talking through kind of what that work looks like later on during the session today. So if you could take a moment to just tell us a little bit about yourself in the chat, your name, the name of your business, what industry you're in, and kind of what type of business it is, when it was founded, and if you have employees, how many. That'll just help us to get a sense of who's in the room. And of course, if you have any specific questions that you want to have answered during the session today, you can feel free to throw those in the chat as well, or in the Q&A as well, so that we can make sure to get those answered for you while we're together this evening. And I actually can't, oh, there, I see the chat. Okay, great. So I should be able to see things as they pop up. All right, and as you're doing that, I'm going to pass things over to my colleague Khalif, and he can introduce himself. Well, I guess I didn't introduce myself, so I'll do that really quickly, and then I'll pass it over to Khalif. Sorry, I introduced ICA, but not myself. So my name is Allison Curtis, and I manage ICA's business conversions and consulting program. So we work with companies and helping them to transition to employee ownership. We provide succession planning coaching and feasibility studies, and work with companies and kind of understanding this option as they're considering their exits. So, Khalif, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. My name's Khalif. I'm the senior engagement consultant here at the ICA Group. And I help with initial intakes and educating business owners on employee ownership options, and really being an advocate for employee ownership and trying to really cement it in a lot of our economic development and business development landscapes. So thank you. It's great to be here today. And yeah, I can take it on. I can take this section. So I'm going to talk about ownership transfer options in general. What happens, when you want to leave your business for any reason? What are some of the exit options that you have? Well, I'm going to go into a list of these 5 options here. So the first option is going to be the third-party sale via broker or an investment banker. So that's something that most people are familiar with, just selling your business to an external party. There's the management buyout, which is when one of your key employees purchases the business and then runs it. There's an internal transfer to a family member. So essentially, you're just keeping it in the family, passing it on to an heir or someone else that would like to take it on. And then, we have one of the main themes for today is selling to your employees through a broad-based employee ownership. And then we have the last option, which is to simply liquidate your business, sell all your assets. So we're going to go through the pros and cons of each of these approaches and why you may want to consider a sale to employee ownership above all of these options. So for a third-party sale, you have several advantages here. The buyer can, one of the first advantages is that the buyer can finance the purchase. In a lot of cases that a third party may have, the capital needed to purchase the business outright. In a lot of cases, this might be another company. This might be someone that, just has, the funds available to purchase it. So they can just, they can finance the purchase. Usually they have that option available. The owner can also exit on a faster timeline. So when a third party is involved, usually they can come in, this third party has all the resources necessary available to really take on the business, to continue running operations and keeping things going smoothly. And then the owner really doesn't have to spend as much time trying to worry about who's going to take over for management. A lot of times these third party buyers, they'll bring all of those resources in together. And then the selling owner can also usually get the most money out of this sale because a lot of these third-party buyers are typically well-funded. Now, some of the challenges with a third-party sale are that a lot of buyers that look to purchase businesses are pretty selective about the businesses they consider. Many times they want to you might have a strategic buyer that's looking for a particular type of business and a particular industry, and one that they can really like pump up the value of, and then maybe sell it down the road. So that's, a lot of times private equity uses this model. They'll purchase a business, they'll hold it, change up the management. So that really goes into the second challenge that we face is that, an outside buyer, because they're coming from, a different environment, they're going to bring their own culture to the business. They're going to run it the way they want to run it. So it really changes the feel of the company, no longer really retains that, the same atmosphere that existed when the original owner was there. A lot of times, really, the culture shifts, and it can be for better or for worse. So that's something to keep in mind. And, to go along with this, the last thing is that the owner usually has no control or connection to the business. Once the third party comes in, usually they're cut out of the business entirely, and that third party is left to run the business however they would like to. So for the next option, we have a management buyout. So this option is a bit different from the third party in that someone from the company internally is purchasing the business. So a lot of times they can maintain a lot of what's working well with the company. They maintain the operations, they maintain the culture because, there's someone that has been working for this business usually for a long time. They're usually a key employee that really understands um, the owner's intent, why they started the business. They really understand what keeps the business running and what their role is in the community. So, and typically a lot of this, a lot of that knowledge will come with having those existing relationships with staff and customers as well. So they're able to really, continue operating the business as the owner was there. There might be some shifts, but more or less the business can really continue operating in the same manner. Now, some of the challenges to a management buyout um, are that you might not the selling owner might not receive as much money as in a sale to a third party, usually because the manager, one of the key employees, typically they're not business owners themselves. They don't have a lot of capital available, so a lot of times they're just relying on the salary that they're making from the company. And, in those cases, it's usually going to require seller financing because they're not going to have, the capital available, or they might not be able to get a loan from a bank to purchase the business. They might not have the credit history or the assets. So it can be challenging for a management buyout to work out financially. And a lot of times it really requires a strong relationship with the exiting owner and a strong plan for succession there when it comes to a financial return. So the owner will probably, may need to be okay with receiving the money over a longer period of time rather than, a huge buyout upfront. So for the next transfer here, we have, leaving it to a family member, keeping it in the family. And this is something that a lot of business owners do. It's pretty common, for family-owned businesses to just pass it down from generation to generation or pass it to a brother or sister. So this is something that, a lot of folks are familiar with. You keep the family legacy. You've got a lot of companies it'll say like family owned since 1905 or something like that, and that's great. But eventually, it's meaningful. It's something that they'll usually understand how the business works. But eventually, you run out of people to pass the business to, and that could be for many reasons. Maybe you didn't have any kids that want the business. They want to go off and do their own thing. They don't want to run a pizza shop or some kind of trades company. They want to really venture off, and you might not have people that in the family that want to take over the business. So at some point, that cycle breaks, and a lot of times, you'll have to consider other options. Another challenge is that mixing business and family can get complicated. Sometimes, it can be stressful to have that financial obligation, or when it comes to paying off a debt or, paying off some kind of paying off the loan for the business. A lot of family members, they want deals, they want special treatment, and you might not get all the money that you want because you have to pass it off for the family member and you have to still maintain that relationship down the line. So it can get a bit complicated in those cases. And, similar to the management buyout, usually requires seller financing. A lot of times a family member won't have, all the cash on hand to really buy the business outright. So you're still running into a lot of the same issues there. So now we have our star of the show for today, which is a sale to employees, otherwise known as a broad-based employee ownership plan. So what are some of the advantages of this plan? You can preserve the legacy and the values of the business because, you're selling it similar to a management buyout. You're selling it to folks that know how to run the business, that have usually been around for a long time, and that have that relationship with the customer base. So you're really preserving the feel of the business and the way they move in the community. It also rewards employees for years of service. People that have been around for a long time, they get to share in the profits of the company because they all have a stake in making the company successful. So this is something that usually energizes and incentivizes employees. The sale can happen gradually. So a sale to your employees doesn't have to occur all at once. You can sell pieces of the company over time to your employee until it eventually becomes 100% employee owned. So you get to exit on your own timeline, and you can have some flexibility for how you sell your business. So what are some of the challenges? You might not receive as much money in a sale to a third party, which, can be true sometimes. Another fact that's not listed here, however, is that a lot of businesses, the vast majority of businesses do not sell on the marketplace. So while there can be a big reward to putting your company on a brokerage site and trying to sell it. A lot of times it's really risky to do that, and the business might not, end up getting sold. And then the other piece is that it also likely requires seller financing due to the financial structures around how co-op transactions happen. And Allison will get a little bit more into that in her section around converting your company to an employee-owned business. But it's a little trickier to get financing for an employee-owned businesses. Definitely not impossible. Plenty of businesses do it. But usually it'll require some form of seller financing. All right, so I'll pass it back to Allison, and she'll, talk about, what exactly is, employee ownership.
Great. Thanks, Khalif. So when we talk about employee ownership, there's three primary models that are kind of best fit for small companies. And we'll talk through each of these in more detail and give some examples of each. When we say employee ownership, what we're really talking about is broad-based employee ownership, which means that the company is owned by all or many of its employees, not one or two key employees, but a broad base of employees. And there are a lot of misconceptions around what that means and what that looks like. So we're going to try to kind of make clear how employee-owned companies are run, how they work, and give as much detail as possible around the different models that are available. So the three here are ESOP, or Employee Stock Ownership Plan, which is kind of the most common and well-known about option, a worker cooperative, and an employee ownership trust. So let's start with an ESOP. An ESOP is actually a specialized stock bonus plan that is allowed to invest primarily in employer stock. So ESOPs are essentially qualified retirement plans that hold the ownership of the company in trust. So they're governed by both the IRS and ERISA. And in an ESOP, workers don't own the stock of the company directly, but rather through a trust. So what does this actually mean? What does it actually look like? It means that employees become eligible to become owners after they've worked for the company for a year, as long as they're at least 18 years old, and that they, over the course of time, are allotted shares. And upon leaving the company, those shares are purchased back by the company and they receive the payout as a retirement benefit, either when they retire or they can kind of fold it over into their next, into another retirement fund. ESOPs are usually a great fit for larger companies. They are highly regulated because they are qualified retirement plans. So they come with certain costs, both to set them up and to maintain them over time. So we usually say that an ESOP is a good fit for a company that has at least 15 or 20 employees and that's making at least $350,000 to $500,000 in earnings before taxes. So usually much larger companies are a good fit for this. There are some great tax benefits to ESOPs. ESOPs are tax-free at the federal income tax level. So that helps to kind of alleviate some of the costs that are associated with maintaining them over time. It's just making sure that those tax benefits outweigh the cost of maintaining. So a few examples here on the right. Harpoon is one that's pretty well known. They have a great story of when the previous owners were brought the whole staff into a meeting and said, okay, we've decided to sell the company and the future owners are in an envelope underneath your seat. And so everybody pulls out the envelope, open it up, and there's a mirror inside. So this was their way of telling their employees, hey, you're the new owners of this company. It does mean, right, that either you have to hire a new CEO if you are the CEO of the company and you're also going to be moving on, or there has to be some sort of management succession plan that's kind of built in as well. So these are a few companies based in Massachusetts that are ESOPs. An employee ownership trust is another model here that we'll talk about a little bit. An employee ownership trust, a lot of people have heard of, gosh, is it Patagonia or Columbia? I always get it mixed up. There's an outdoor supply store, I believe it's Columbia, that the owner sold part of it to what's called a perpetual purpose trust. The idea being that some portion of the company would be held in trust to benefit the environment. This is the same sort of idea. It's a perpetual purpose trust that is put in place to benefit employees in perpetuity. So it's created under state law and it can be used to purchase companies. And then the EOT holds some or all of the shares of the company and ensures that employees have a share in profits, a voice in governance, and that the structure is preserved forever. A couple of examples down here, Hummingbird and Craftsman Technology Group. Craftsman is a small boutique consulting firm that works with companies and organizations on building out data systems to help them succeed. EOTs are very popular in the United Kingdom. They have some great tax benefits over there for EOTs that we don't yet have here. They're kind of slowly becoming more popular in the United States, but they haven't really been here long enough to be legally tested. There's not much case law around them. And so there are some there are some questions we don't entirely know about how they work and how they function in a legal context. So they're an option, but we always want to give people that kind of background. There aren't very many in the United States, but they're gaining a lot of popularity and interest at the moment. And the third option that we're going to talk about kind of most during our session today is a worker cooperative or co-op. So a worker cooperative is a business that's owned and controlled by its employees rather than by a single owner, several partners, or outside shareholders. And they're driven by this principle of one person, one vote. We'll talk more about that structure shortly. A few examples of worker cooperatives are Equal Exchange. If you've ever had an organic banana, it was most likely from Equal Exchange. A Yard and a Half is a landscaping company out in Eastern Massachusetts. Works is a printing cooperative that's based in Worcester, and South Mountain Company is one of Massachusetts' oldest worker cooperatives. They are a design build firm in Martha's Vineyard. And worker cooperatives are a great fit for companies that are not large enough to become ESOPs. They allow for that ownership transfer to happen to a broad base of employees without the regulatory and tax, or without the regulatory restrictions and expense of an ESOP. They're very flexible, and they are a great fit for many, if not most, small companies that have at least 3 staff. They can be as large as we have. I think the largest worker cooperative in the country right now is about 1,500 worker owners out in the Bronx, the HCA, and then some of our smallest are just 2 or 3 employees and members. So I'm going to pass it back to Khalif to give a little bit more nitty-gritty detail about how worker cooperatives work. And of course, if you have questions about any of this, feel free to throw them in the Q&A or in the chat.
All right. Thanks, Allison. So there are really 2 main facets of the worker cooperative. The first one is shared ownership. So what exactly does that mean? It means that ownership of the business is shared equally among all the employees who choose to buy into the company. And when we use the term buy into the company, we'll get a little bit into that later, but essentially what happens is that you purchase an ownership share, and this is the same for everyone. And only one, it's one person per share. So You can only buy one share in the company, and it doesn't go up or change in value. It stays the same. So the difference between that and what some of you might be familiar with in a regular corporation is that only workers can become owners of the company. So outside shareholders are typically not allowed in the company. They can't vote on decisions. Everyone will have that one share per owner. And the last major part, the last major piece of shared ownership is, of course, the profit sharing. So profit is shared equitably, typically by a formula that the co-op determines. Now, I do want to make the distinction between profit and salary and compensation here. So the profit will be whatever's left over after the company pays out salaries, wages, all the expenses, whatever that net profit, whatever the bottom line of the company is, the workers are entitled to that profit based on, a percentage that the company determines. So shared ownership, a really powerful way for workers to really, reap the benefits and also, have this like shared ownership stake in the company. So the next facet of worker cooperatives is shared control. So not only do you have ownership of the company and you're able to reap the benefits, you also run the company and you have a way and you have more say in how the business is run than in conventional businesses. So what does this look like in a co-op? One of the first ones is access to financial information. So in a co-op, everyone will have access to some form of financial information. It might not be, an entire balance sheet or profit and loss statement, but you will get to see how the company is performing on a regular basis, at least yearly. So, you have a sense of, you can have a sense of, what financial decisions the company should be making. Then that leads into having an equal vote on big decisions. So these are decisions that affect the entire nature of the cooperative and will change how the co-op conducts business. So for example, if the co-op wanted to change their industry or move the company to a new location, those would be really large, weighty decisions that the co-op would seek the approval of the general body for. So everyone would have an equal vote on, a lot of these big decisions, but really a lot of the power for more of the day-to-day and the more short-term decisions comes from the and elects a board. Now, not all cooperatives have boards, but most do. The vast majority have a board that guides the strategic focus of the company, sets policy. In a lot of cases, they can set pay, and they also have a hand in selecting the CEO or general manager of the company. So that board piece is powerful. It has a role in really determining, the future of the company and through this representative democratic process. So I got into a little bit of this before, but what exactly makes a co-op different than a traditional company? So the three real focus points here are wealth, voice, and power. The co-op really changes how each of these are distributed throughout the company. So in terms of wealth, instead of it, again, going to owners or going to one sole owner or a small group of owners or shareholders that invest in the company, that wealth will then be transferred to the workers, the people that work for the company, the people that have the membership shares. So that's really what makes the co-op different when it comes to the sharing of wealth. When it comes to voice, usually in traditional companies, the owner will make policy and management decisions, and usually it's a hierarchical system where really, all decisions there might be some decisions that are delegated to management, but really the buck stops at the owner. The owner gets the final say in what happens in the company. That's a bit different in a co-op. Worker owners get to decide on policies. They get to vote. They have a hand in electing that board that will then determine what the policies will be, and even ultimately who the CEO or the top management of the company might be. So worker owners also have a say in the budget as well, because they are going to have access to that financial information. So their voices get, it's either heard directly on the large decisions or in a representative style via the board of directors. And then there's power. The way power is distributed in a co-op is, again, much different than in a traditional company. The owner really makes the decision to keep the company open, close the company, move it, decide to sell an entirely different product or service. And really, the workers just have to live with that decision or leave. In the case of a co-op, the worker owners get to make these big decisions that will, impact the trajectory of their careers, their livelihood with the company. So we find that it really, a lot of workers take pride in being worker owners of the company because they have, a lot of that decision-making power. So how does governance work in a co-op? I know, I talked about, decision-making, but what does it actually look like? I'm talking about the membership, we're talking about the board and management. How do these three pieces really work together in a co-op to make sure that the operation is running smoothly? So, like I mentioned before, the membership will elect the board, and in a lot of cases, they can make changes to the bylaws as well. So they can make changes to the bylaws, which is, just the governing document of the co-op. It determines how power is distributed, who gets the vote on what. So the membership really holds that power, and with that, they're then delegate a lot of the other power that's not necessarily. They delegate a lot of the more short-term and strategic making decisions to the board of directors. And the board of directors can vary in size. It typically depends on the size of the co-op. So that's something that's usually dictated by the bylaws, but really the board is there to, have some of those, make a lot of decisions that maybe the membership doesn't want to vote on directly. So it's a way to really smooth out the process, ensure that, you have this elected body that's really in charge of making a lot more of the, the policy and short-term decisions. And then the board of directors then checks the management as, a way of selecting and supervising the leadership. So whether that's the CEO or the general manager, the board has oversight on the top manager, and they can really oversee, and they, can decide to hire a new one, fire the old one, put them on, give them some kind of warning. The board is really acts as, a check on the power of the management. And then when you get to the management piece, you still have to ensure that the business is operational. You have to make sure that people are able to perform their jobs properly. And you still have to make sure that you're bringing in the right people to do the job. So hiring, firing, and ensuring that you have, the personnel to get the work done. So the management, in turn, supervises the membership and ensures that, everyone is following company policy. They hold a lot of executive power in that sense, and ensuring that, everything is being followed and the operations are running smoothly. So when you look at this system altogether, it really is a system of checks and balances where no one governance body has, absolute power over the other. This helps keeps things fair and equitable through the co-op, and prevents one or a few people from running off and taking advantage of their roles in the company. All right, so in a co-op, you're likely to wear different roles in the company. And we want to explain that this can really be a strength in a co-op. You've got multiple different hats, and you've got different perspectives coming from each position in the company. So, you have the employee. Everyone's an employee, but you might also be a manager. And then, eventually you might become a member owner of the company. And then, some of those member owners will then be elected to the board. In some cases, you might wear all of these hats. So it's important to really take into account, the perspectives of people all over the company, whether you're an employee or a manager, whatever level you are in the company. You want to make sure that everyone's voice is being heard, no matter what level they are in the company. And that's something that's unique about a co-op. You can consider the voices of people that wouldn't normally be listened to, or wouldn't normally have that power in a traditionally owned company. So it really empowers people to participate and put everything they need into the company. So now I'll pass it back to Alison, and she'll discuss what the conversion process looks like, if you're looking to transition from a traditionally owned business to a worker cooperative.
Great, thanks, Khalif. So we call a transition, like Khalif just described, a conversion, right? The company's being converted from a traditional or conventional business to a worker cooperative. So what does that actually look like? Starts with the conventional business being owned by the selling owner. And then the business takes out a loan to purchase the business from the owners of the company. Employees then establish a worker cooperative structure and buy membership shares. We'll talk about that in more detail. And then the worker cooperative exists and employees own the business cooperatively. The business then pays back the loan on the purchase of the business using its profits over time. So in order for this all to take place, there are several steps that have to occur. And ICA works with organizations kind of across the country on supporting these types of transitions. So we work with companies on 5 steps along the pathway to these transitions. So we start off with establishing goals, then we assess the feasibility of a transition, we plan out that transition, complete a transaction, and then support companies in operating as employee-owned. So I'm going to walk through all of these 5 steps and give some kind of more granular level detail as to what that work looks like and how your company might be able to assess whether it's a good fit for a transition like this, if employee ownership is something you're considering. So first step is outlining objectives. So our role here is to dig in really deeply with the selling owner to understand what their goals are. We want to understand your financial goals, right? We want to make sure that you have an eye to your retirement, that you're paying attention to your financial needs from the sale of the company. But we also want to understand your non-financial goals, right? Are you trying to preserve legacy? Are you hoping to reward your employees or continue to maintain their jobs? What are the things that are driving you beyond that financial payout? We also want to understand the timeline that you're trying to work within. Oftentimes, owners come to us and say, "Wow, I really want to get out of this company. Can I do it in 3 months?" And we have to say, that's really, really unlikely. Usually, these transitions take about a year. And that's kind of the case for most business transactions. So we encourage people to get in touch with an advisor at least a year, if not much more, in advance to kind of start planning things out. And we want to understand what a selling owner's post-transition relationship is going to be, right? Do they want to continue to work for the company part-time? Do they want to sit on the board of directors but not be involved in the day-to-day? Are they kind of ready to cut ties and go to Florida and go fishing every day and not have to think about the business ever again? by understanding what your goals are around that kind of post-transition relationship to the company, we'll be able to better understand if employee ownership is the right fit. We want to understand all of the different options that a selling owner is looking at, right? It's not our role to force a model onto a company that isn't a good fit for employee ownership or for a selling owner. So we'll really want to make sure that we understand all of the different options that someone's looking at. We'll also, during this phase, be kind of gathering basic information about the company and try to get a sense of if the selling owner has had conversations with their employees about next steps, things like that. So assuming that there is interest in employee ownership, that somebody wants to kind of continue on this process and that their goals match up with what's possible with an employee ownership transition, we'll move into step 2, which is assessing feasibility. There are kind of 3 primary types of feasibility that we conduct when we're doing these projects. The first is financial feasibility. So we'll review a company's financials, we'll look at their revenue model and really get into the nitty-gritty and understand how they operate. We'll conduct an estimate of company value. So we will use kind of historic financials and get a sense of what the company could be worth on a third party market. We'll also take a look at different financing options. As Khalif mentioned earlier in this presentation, there's typically at least some portion of seller financing involved in these transactions, but there are oftentimes banks that get involved and lenders that get involved in these transactions as well. We've got some amazing lending partners that focus primarily on lending to worker cooperatives, for example. So they've got great products that they can provide that would allow for there to be cash at close. So that, yeah, we kind of piece together what that financing structure and what those options might look like for a company. In fact, I think there will be a follow-up session to this session specifically talking about the different financing options and kind of how the financial transaction works in the next few weeks. So keep an eye out from the City of Cambridge. And really what we're looking at there is, as we mentioned earlier, these are highly leveraged transactions, meaning that most of the value of the company is being produced through debt. And so we have to make sure that the company can afford to repay that debt through its profits over time. So we're taking a look at profitability and getting a sense of what might be feasible for the company. And then we're modeling that out and coming up with a proposed transaction that will hopefully meet the selling owner's needs, that will provide an opportunity for profit sharing for the employee owners, and that won't overburden the company in debt. So all of that is kind of wrapped up into a pretty little bow and into a report, and that's our financial feasibility work. At the same time, we're also looking at operational feasibility. So oftentimes these transitions are, a selling owner is also a key manager or a CEO or a general manager. So we have to work through a succession plan. So does that mean hiring for that role? Does that mean training someone up from another part in the company to fill that role? So we're working with an owner to figure out their roles and responsibilities and how they can be transferred. And then finally, we're doing kind of a base level of legal feasibility to identify any potential legal issues that could come up in the transfer. Things like if your company has specific licensing or personal guarantees attached to leases, just to make sure that we're kind of aware of those things before they become issues down the line. So assuming there's a feasible transaction and that there's something here that the selling owner is excited about and wants to move forward with, we would move to step 3, which is structuring the transaction. So this is when we typically start engaging more deeply with employees. However, sometimes employees get involved earlier on in the process. It really depends on the selling owner and what it is that how they're really approaching this process. Sometimes they want workers to be involved earlier and participate in kind of thinking through their different options. Other times they want to wait until they're sure that they're moving forward with this option before engaging with employees and letting them know. So we kind of we'll follow your lead, but if a selling owner isn't entirely sure how to approach their workers, we typically let them know, wait until you've got a very clear vision of what the transaction is going to look like. So At step 3, we start to get to know the team and build trust with the group of employees. We provide a lot of training around what the cooperative model is, how it works, what they can expect. We also kind of talk through the financial transaction, letting them know, this is what the selling owner is proposing, and working through kind of helping them wrap their brains around the transaction, what the costs and benefits are of this type of transition, and hopefully getting them on board for the transition to take place. We'll also be working with a smaller group of employees called the steering committee that will be helping to develop the new governance system. They'll determine membership eligibility, buy-in fees, what the board will look like, things like that. They'll also work on potentially some management and operational needs analysis and planning alongside the owner to kind of make sure that the company is going to be rock solid on the other side of the transition. We may also support a company in drafting workplace policies if they don't have those in place yet. And we'll do some training around best practices for running a democratic workplace, right? How to have board meetings, how to read financial statements, how to make decisions as a group, run, like I said, run meetings. So we, at the end of this process, will understand how many employees will join the initial employee group that will become owners. And you typically want to see at least a majority of employees who are saying, yep, I'm ready. Though there might be some who aren't interested in joining membership, and that is totally acceptable. We oftentimes get that question. So step 4 is where we play kind of a quarterback role around completing the actual transfer of the company. So if there are banks involved, if there are lenders, outside lenders involved, we'll work with you and with the lender to complete underwriting and make a plan for the closing. We'll coordinate with legal and accounting on all of these kind of sticky transaction details, things like entity choice and tax status, security exemptions, drafting legal documents, any tax consequences that might come up for the selling owner. And then we'll work with a legal team to finalize the corporate bylaws, the membership agreements, and the loan agreements for all of the parties to review. And then at the end of this phase, the sale takes place, money gets transferred, and the ownership changes hands. So then step 5 is operate as a democratic firm. So operate as an employee-owned company. So we work with companies by supporting them in holding their first member meeting, electing their board of directors. We'll help to facilitate initial meetings if folks need support around that and provide clarity on decision making. We'll continuously develop and help to support continuously and develop systems for the board to understand how the company's doing, to set good policy and management, and just generally be there as a support for the board as they're embarking on their first year in this new role. We also plan for ongoing board development and training needs, both for the board and for membership, oftentimes providing coaching and technical assistance, things of that nature. So really quickly, I'm going to talk through a few examples of companies who have made these transitions, just to give you a sense of the various different industries and types of companies who have become employee-owned. Big Duck is a communications firm based in New York City that converted in 2021. This is a picture of the selling owner, Sarah Durham. She decided that she wanted to just change careers. She wasn't ready for retirement, but she wanted to become an art teacher. And so she decided to sell her company that she had started 25 plus years earlier out of her basement. And she sold to her employees and still sits on the board of directors and now has a second career. She actually decided ultimately not to become an art teacher and is now provides business coaching or leadership coaching to owners who are considering what to do as kind of second phase careers. So that's an example in New York City. A little closer to home is Gillette Restaurant Equipment. They are based in Massachusetts. The owner worked with ICA to determine the feasibility of a transition to an ESOP. So again, this is a company that was a little bit bigger and had enough earnings to kind of make an ESOP worthwhile. So we helped her understand that her company was kind of on the brink of being financially viable as an ESOP. And so then we were able to refer her to an ESOP service provider, and Gillette became employee owned in the beginning of 2023. So that process that I walked through just moments ago is kind of specifically designed for cooperatives. However, if a company is a better fit for an ESOP, we work with them around some kind of basic feasibility and then support them in getting kind of transitioned over to a specific ESOP service provider, usually a team of lawyers and accountants who help to kind of shepherd that transition. And then finally, this is John, who is the previous owner of Sound Mirror, which is a small music recording and mastering company based in Jamaica Plain. They've been in operation for over 50 years. And one of my favorite things about this company is that they've had over 140 Grammy nominations. Just this year, they won 2 new Grammys. In 2023, the owner sold to his 4 employees who took over both ownership and management of the company. This is a very unique company, super small. They do recording and mastering primarily for symphonies and operas all around the world. And there's only 4 of them. And so they have kind of figured out a structure that works for them where they're all sitting on the board, they're all members, and they also all co-manage the company together. So they don't have a representative board, and they figured out how to kind of make that work through having different realms of decision making. And they've been super successful. They just moved from their previous location and bought a new building. Really exciting to see them thrive in their new structure in the last couple of years. So I believe that's the end of our presentation. So we've got time for Q&A if there are any questions that folks are coming up with. And yeah.
I have a couple questions while we wait and see if there are any others from participants, but I think one of the questions that we've received from a few different businesses is, how do I know if my employees are ready to run a business? Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I can start, and Khalif, then maybe you can add to whatever perspective you've got on this. Yeah, I think oftentimes, well, there's a few ways to think about this. One is that in most employee-owned companies, the day-to-day management of the company kind of stays as it currently is, right? That there's some level of management that is ensuring that day-to-day operations are running smoothly and that the company is being managed as it has been. And that kind of strategy and bigger picture decision making is happening at the board level and at the membership level, but that management kind of stays the same. So oftentimes there's this myth of like, oh, if my company is being, is owned by my employees, does that mean that they're involved in every single decision all the time? And the answer is no, right? We find ways to delegate decisions, to create structures and systems that allow for decisions to happen effectively and efficiently. I think also employees have really spectacular, in my experience, have really spectacular and interesting perspectives on their work, and have I've watched as employees become owners, the ways in which they can engage with the company in new ways to kind of insert their or infuse the company with their unique perspectives on the work. So they might notice things that a top level manager doesn't notice. They might see certain inefficiencies on the shop floor that can be addressed. And so I think giving folks an opportunity to engage in their work or in their workplace more actively can be both empowering for individuals as well as really a positive on the company itself.
Yeah, I think for the most part, you covered everything, Allison. I mean, the only thing I would add, um, you know, I think it's more of a mindset shift than anything. The actual, like Allison said, the actual operations shouldn't change that much, but it helps to have employees start thinking like owners. You know, they have a more long term, their view of the company, it takes us more long-term approach, and they can be more invested in, the financial performance, and the working conditions there. If you have employees that are already, really engaged, and you have some kind of decision-making process where you include employees in your decisions and they're already engaged, that might be a sign that they, could really take on the company one day, having them be involved. Um, of course, it always helps if there's already some kind of profit sharing system in place, that usually, already incentivizes employees to um, really start looking at the bottom line and thinking about how they can make the company run more efficiently. So those are just a few practices that, sometimes if, an owner is not quite ready to sell the company, if it's something that they're thinking about, they might start implementing, little pieces of, employee ownership uh, traits, in their company, whether it's that profit sharing or that, decision-making process, they might, incorporate some of that before they decide to fully commit to the idea.
I have another question. Another question that I think maybe I had when I was first learning about employee ownership, and I've heard from others as well, is like, and I think you sort of touched on it a little bit, but for decision making, like we don't want everybody to weigh in on a paint color. We don't have time for that. What would you say to somebody who brings up decision making as a possible challenge?
Yeah. Um, totally agree that like finding ways to delegate decision making is kind of key to running a company, right? So I think what we tried to show in some of the examples earlier is that there are many different ways to organize yourself as a cooperative. As many cooperatives as there are the number of ways you can organize yourself as a cooperative. That was a little bit of a messy sentence, but hopefully it makes sense. Right, the idea being that some co-ops do decide to have flat management structures, do decide to make every decision as a group. They might use systems like sociocracy or other forms of kind of organizing thoughts and ideas and deciding things as a group. And that's great, but that doesn't work for most or many companies. And so where I think that the worker cooperative structure really thrives is that it allows for that delegation of decision making to happen. And Khalif walked through that cycle, right? That like day-to-day management can continue to live at that operational level of a manager. And then the board of directors can kind of take that strategic decision-making role where they're approving a budget that's being, created by that top level manager, but infusing it with their own perspective. And then that board of directors is accountable to a membership group that is really typically only engaged maybe once or twice a year with a big decision that their input is needed on. So we really encourage the companies that we work with to think critically about how decision making is being delegated. We have lots of great tools that we implement with groups to ensure that they have things they can refer back to when they're wondering, wait, hold on, who's responsible for making this decision? Is this board level or is this a management decision? So we've got tools and frameworks that we use with the companies that we work with to make sure that they're ready when those questions do come up.
Yeah, I guess I can just add here. I think, like Allison was saying, a lot of decisions, a lot of companies just decide to keep the same, similar management structures. They don't want, and I think a lot of employees have this same mindset too. They don't want to vote on every single decision because that would just make your head spin. There's like a million decisions that company has to make daily. So, that's something that we definitely encourage with the co-ops that we work with. I think one of the biggest strengths I think of the co-op is the flexibility, and then the shared information, and like the free flow of information. You're gonna have access to the information. I think which is something that's really powerful. So even if you're not the one making the decision, there's usually some way you can exercise your power in the cooperative, even if you're not directly voting on the issue. So if it's through the board, or just like talking with your manager, a lot of that is really encouraged, in the co-op model, and it really opens the door to really have some of um, these more nuanced conversations, and really have, that transparency in the workplace.
I'll go and ask another question before we wrap up. I was speaking with a business owner recently who is not ready to exit their business, and but they want to have a plan, right? Um, how do you recommend that folks who are trying to think ahead, how far should they think ahead if they really kind of feel that they have a lot of time? And what can they do now, even if they want to be really involved in their business, maybe even for 10.
I think you cut out at the end there. I think you muted. Were you?
Sorry, my internet connection's unstable.
Oh,
It
it's
kept
okay.
reminding me that throughout the presentation. What I was asking was, I talked to the business owner recently who uh, was not anywhere near like maybe 10, 20 years away from thinking about exiting their business, but they want to be prepared. And they like the idea of selling their business to employees or becoming an employee co-op, but um, what timeline should they consider? They feel they have a lot of time right now, but and they want to stay involved. But what kind of next steps can a business owner take, even if they don't see themselves leaving their business anytime soon?
I'm gonna take this one quick.
Oh, yeah, I can start. So, if employee ownership is something that they're thinking about, they can start taking some of those steps, like I had mentioned before, of, including employees more in the decision-making systems of the company. Maybe they could institute some kind of profit sharing. So, those are more practical things that will affect, how the employees, they can look at open book management. Um, those are all, operational changes that they can take. In terms of preparing the company for sale and thinking about their exit, it helps to start thinking about their goals right away. If they're looking at, exit planning is something that you want to plan far in advance. You want to think of how you know, what the next stage of your life is going to look like after, you're through owning your business. How much money do you want to retire with? Is your business a big part of your retirement plan? And if so, how much would you want to sell your business for? What value are you hoping to get? And then if your business is not at that value right now, how can you get to that future value? What can you do now to, increase revenue, and make sure you have a value, and, a sale of the business that you can feel okay with, when it's time to part ways. Those are just a few of the things. Always, other housekeeping things, just having clean books, clean records, making sure that you separate, your personal expenses from the business. All that helps, having a good track record, keeping good balance sheets, having a good understanding of how many assets the business is holding. All of that is going to be really important when, it finally comes time to sell your business. But really, it's just, it's important to start just thinking about your goals ahead, and thinking about, where you envision yourself in the next 10, 15 years. But in terms of a timeline, I say it's never too early to start. You should always just have some kind of exit plan ready, because it can take a lot longer than you think, to sell your business to employees. It can take several years to finally, finalize the deal, or, exit in a way that, you want to. So, some of that can be through a partial employee ownership sale. If you want to sell pieces of the company at a time, you're free to do that. And that often, that can happen over, the course of several years. So, yeah, I would say it's never too early.
Yeah, agree with everything Khalif said and would just add like a written exit plan. Every business owner should have a written exit plan, even if they started the business yesterday. Just something that indicates what happens when you're gone. And not to be morose about it, but just it's always good to have a backup plan. So we always recommend having a written exit plan on hand and updating it every couple of years. And as Khalif mentioned, there are a lot of ways that, you can become employee owned before you're ready to completely exit. We have a lot of owners who decide that they want to stick around and continue to work for the company as one of many worker owners, just kind of change their role in relationship to the company, or maybe they want to kind of slowly start to edge out of their role and be on the board of directors. There are a ton of different options for how business owners can kind of approach these transitions and extend them over time, depending on what their goals are.
If we don't have any other questions, we can wrap up. Thank you so much, Allison and Khalif, for sharing about employee ownership as a potential succession strategy. I want to shout out to an upcoming workshop we have on June 24th. We're just finalizing those details now, but we're going to be working with the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast to talk about how to finance employee ownership transitions, and more on that to come. Any final words, Allison or Cleve?
No, thank you so much for having us, and feel free to get in touch if you'd like to learn more or have questions. Always happy to talk to folks.
Yeah, same here. Thank you everyone for attending. I hope this was helpful for you. And I hope you enjoy the workbook as well. Of course, if you have any questions, follow up, we'll be here.
Yes, and that workbook will be available on our website for anyone to access, along with a recording of this presentation. So if you have any trouble accessing that, get in touch with me, shuver@cambridgema.gov, and that will likely be online in a couple weeks. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for coming.
All right.